Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Thanks everybody. So let's stop destroying it.
I want to grow up in a world without climate change.
Understand the importance of nature, as nature has helped us all. It provides us everything that we need, like fruits, vegetable, oxygen. So please be supportive.
I want to see a world where humans learn to coexist with nature and respect it. A world where the environment thrives and the future of the next generations is promised and limitless.
The climate crisis is affecting everyone around the world. Everyone has had a hand in starting it, so everyone must work together to stop it.
The world is changing day by day. Hear this message, no more delay. Before the world becomes black and grey, be smart about replacing nature with buildings.
Everything that is going to help us mitigate climate change is exactly what is going to improve our lives. We already have all the solutions to the crisis. We just need to implement them.
The Amazon is calling for our help, and we need to build bridges and not walls so we can build together a better future for everyone, not leaving anyone behind.
I would like to live in a world where every young person feels like they can be part of creating positive change, because only together can we create the change we wish to see.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, please take your seats. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony for the World Leaders Summit of COP26. Please welcome Scottish small piper Brí Chahaimbull from the Isle of Skye, performing her own arrangement of the traditional melodies and Lamris and Harris dance.
It's possible that there's only one civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. There may only have ever been one, and there may only ever be one. And that's us. We may be the first and last. That's important. If you're looking for a hint as to how we should behave politically towards each other, towards our planet, then this idea matters. Imagine that the Earth is the only place in a galaxy where intelligent life exists. The only place where collections of atoms as old as time have come together into improbable patterns that can think and feel and bring meaning to an otherwise meaningless universe. How should we behave? Surely, notwithstanding the fact that we're tiny, fragile things on a mote of dust, orbiting around one star amongst 400 billion, we must consider ourselves and our world to be inconceivably valuable.
With her poem written for COP26, we are joined by writer, performer and storyteller Yersa Daly Ward.
Nothing will be saved without you. It is important to begin with the fact. This is your invitation to lead with light. You were born to be creators of the ground entrusted, yesterday's beneficiaries, inheritors of land, air, time. Now is all we have left, holding the world in our hands, with the most inconvenient truth to honor the earth, land, sky. Our day is older than it used to be, but not yet gone. The day is dimming and still not done. Come, leading lights. We were born to be creators of the possible future. The truth will not leave without you, heavy though it may be. The staggering state of play is leaning upon you. The hour that you stand in is goldening, already coppering, already fire. Ancestors of tomorrow, this is an intervention. Earth is talking to you today, and Earth has plenty to say. Be architects of something new, protectors of the day. Be shining final hopes, designers of chance and change. The hour is crimson, turning, turning. The hour is bruising, bluing, blue. We are human, and we owe our home. Let's pay our home dues. These are the implications, so we have to end with the facts. Anything less than your best is too much to pay. Anything later than now is too little, too late. Nothing will change without you.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to COP. Welcome to Glasgow and to Scotland, whose most globally famous fictional son is almost certainly a man called James Bond, who generally comes to the climax of his highly lucrative films strapped to a doomsday device, desperately trying to work out which coloured wire to pull to turn it off, while a red digital clock ticks down remorselessly to a detonation that will end human life as we know it. And we are in roughly the same position, my fellow global leaders, as James Bond today. Except that the tragedy is, this is not a movie. And the doomsday device is real. And the clock is ticking to the furious rhythm of hundreds of billions of pistons and turbines and furnaces and engines with which we are pumping carbon into the air faster and faster, record outputs, and quilting the earth in an invisible and suffocating blanket of CO2, raising the temperature of the planet with a speed and an abruptness that is entirely man-made. And we know what the scientists tell us, and we have learned not to ignore them. 2 degrees more, and we jeopardize the food supply for hundreds of millions of people as crops wither, locusts swarm. 3 degrees, and you can add more wildfires and cyclones, twice as many, 5 times as many droughts, and 36 times as many heat waves. 4 degrees, and we say goodbye to whole cities. Miami, Alexandria, Shanghai, all lost beneath the waves. And the longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act. Because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow. I was there with many of you in Copenhagen 11 years ago when we acknowledged we had a problem. I was there in Paris 6 years ago when we agreed to net zero and to try to restrain the rise in the temperature of the planet to 1.5 degrees. And all those promises will be nothing but blah, 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 to coin a phrase. And the anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable unless we make this COP26 in Glasgow the moment when we get real about climate change. And we can. We can get real on coal, cars, cash, and trees. We have the technology to deactivate that ticking doomsday device. Not all at once. I'm afraid it's too late for that. But one by one, and with ever greater speed and efficiency, we can begin to close down those billions of hydrocarbon combustion chambers that you find currently in every corner of the planet. We can phase out the use of cars with hydrocarbon internal combustion engines. By 2035, we can do that. We in the UK are leading by ending new sales by 2030. We can end the use of coal-fired power stations. We can do it by 2040 in the developing world, 2030 in the richer nations. We can plant hundreds of millions of trees, 1 trillion. It's not technologically difficult. And halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. Not just because it's a spiritually uplifting and beautiful thing to do, but because that is the way to restore the balance of nature and to fix carbon in the air. And as we look at the green industrial revolution that's now needed around the world, we in the developed world must recognize the special responsibility we have to help everybody else to do it. Because it was here in Glasgow 250 years ago that James Watt came up with a machine that was powered by steam, that was produced by burning coal. And yes, my friends, we've brought you to the very place where the doomsday machine began to tick. And even though for 200 years the industrialized countries were in complete ignorance of the problem that they were creating, we now have a duty to find those funds. $100 billion a year that was promised in Paris by 2020, but which we won't deliver until 2023, to help the rest of the world to move to green technology. But we cannot and will not succeed by government spending alone. We in this room can deploy hundreds of billions, no question. But the market has hundreds of trillions, and the task now is to work together to help our friends to decarbonize, using our funds, the funds we have in development assistance, and working with all the multilateral development banks so that in the key countries that need to make progress, we can jointly identify the projects that we can help to de-risk so that the private sector money can come in just the same way that it was the private sector that enabled the UK to end our dependence on coal, become the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have the technology. We can find the finance, and we must. And the question for us all today is whether we have the will. And my fellow leaders, as I look around this room, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but we all talk about what we're going to do in 2050 or 2060. I don't think it will escape the notice of the crowds of young people outside, the billions who are watching around the world, half of the population of the world under 30, that the average age of this conclave of world leaders, I'm afraid to say, is over 60. I fully intend to be alive in 2060. I will be a mere 94 years old, even if I'm not still in Downing Street. But you never know. But the children who will judge us are children not yet born, and their children. And we are now coming centre stage before a vast and uncountable audience of posterity, and we mustn't fluff our lines or miss our cue, because if we fail, they will not forgive us. They will know that Glasgow was the historic turning point when history failed to turn. They will judge us with bitterness and with a resentment that eclipses any of the climate activists of today. And they will be right. COP26 will not and cannot be the end of the story on climate change. Even if this conference ends with binding global commitments for game-changing, real-world action, 2 weeks from now, smokestacks will still belch in industrial heartlands. Cows will still belch in their pastures, even if some brilliant Kiwi scientists are teaching them how to be more polite. Cars, powered by petrol and diesel, will still choke congested roads in the world's great cities. No one conference could ever change that. If summits alone solved climate change, then we wouldn't have needed 25 previous COP summits to get where we are today. But while COP26 will not be the end of climate change, it can and it must mark the beginning of the end. In the years since Paris, the world has slowly and with great effort and pain built a lifeboat for humanity. And now is the time to give that lifeboat a mighty shove into the water, like some great liner rolling down the slipways of the Clyde. Take a sextant sighting on 1.5 degrees and set off on a journey to a cleaner, greener future. So let us therefore, in the next days, devote ourselves to this extraordinary task, so that we not only continue with a programme that is of green industrial revolution that is already creating millions of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in power and technology, taking our economies forward, let us also do enough to save our planet and our way of life. And as we work, let us think about those billions of beady eyes that are watching us around the world, increasingly edgy and disenchanted. And let us think of the billions more of the unborn, whose anger will be all the greater if we fail. We cannot let them down. We have the ideas, we have the technology, we have the bankers, we have the corporations and the NGOs, we have the interpreters, we have the meeting rooms. If all else fails, we have the unbeatable hospitality and refreshment of Glasgow. We may not feel much like James Bond, not all of us necessarily look like James Bond, but we have the opportunity and we have the duty to make this summit the moment when humanity finally began, and I stress began, to defuse that bomb, and to make this the moment when we began irrefutably to turn the tide and to begin the fight back against climate change. Yes, it's going to be hard, but yes, we can do it. And so let's get to work with all the creativity and imagination and goodwill that we possess. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of us. Thank you.
Bringing voices from Earth into COP26, please welcome climate campaigner Brianna Fruin.
When I was a little girl, I was taught the importance and impact of words. In my culture, in Samoa, there's a proverb that goes, "E pala ma'a ai le pala upu." It means that even stones decay, but words remain. A lesson in knowing how words can be wielded, how text can change everything, how each word you use is weighted, how switching one word or number could reframe worlds, how climate action can be vastly different from climate justice, how 2 degrees could mean the end and 1.5 could mean a fighting chance. You all have the power here today to be better, to remember that in your meeting rooms and drafting documents are more than just black and white objects, to remember that in your words you wield the weapons that can save us or sell us out. I don't need to remind you the reality of vulnerable communities. If you're here today, you know what climate change is doing to us. You don't need my pain or my tears to know that we're in a crisis. The real question is whether you have the political will to do the right thing, to wield the right words, and to follow it up with long overdue action. If you're looking for inspiration on this, look no further than the climate leadership of young Pacific people. We are not just victims to this crisis. We have been resilient beacons of hope. Pacific youth have rallied behind the cry, "We are not drowning, we are fighting." This is our warrior cry to the world. We are not drowning, we are fighting. This is my message from Earth to COP. I hope you remember my words today and look closely at your words as you go throughout COP, because e pala ma'a ai le pala upu. Thank you. Now please welcome to the stage Chai Suroi.
My name is Chai Suroi. I'm 1 in 24, but my people have been living in the Amazon forest at least 6,000 years. My father, the great chief Almi Suroi, taught me that we must listen to the stars, the moon, the wind, the animals, and the trees. Today, the climate is warming, the animals are disappearing, the rivers are dying, and our plants don't flower like they did before. The earth is speaking. She tells us that we have no more time. A friend asked me, will we continue to think that today's injuries can be resolved with ointments and painkillers, even though we know that tomorrow our wounds will only run deeper? We need a different path, and with bold and global changes. It's not 2030 or 2050, it's now. While you are closing your eyes to reality, the land defender Ariel Wewawau, my friend since I was a kid, was murdered for protecting the forest. Indigenous peoples are in the front line of the climate emergency, and we must be at the center of the decisions happening here. The lies and fake promise. Let us end the pollution of hollow words, and let us fight for a livable future and present. It's always necessary to believe the dream is possible. May our utopia be a future on earth. Thank you.
Please welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Dear Prime Minister Boris Johnson, I want to thank you and to thank COP President Alok Sharma for your hospitality, your leadership and your tireless efforts in the preparation of this COP. Your Royal Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 6 years since the Paris Climate Agreement have been the 6 hottest years on record. Our addiction to fossil fuels is pushing humanity to the brink. We face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. And it's time to say enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves. Our planet is changing before our eyes, from the ocean depths to mountain tops, from melting glaciers to relentless extreme weather events. Sea level rise is double the rate it was 30 years ago. Oceans are hotter than ever and getting warmer faster. Parts of the Amazon rainforest now emit more carbon than they absorb. Recent climate action announcements might give the impression that we are on track to turn things around. This is an illusion. The last published report on national determined contributions showed that they would still condemn the world to a calamitous 2.7-degree increase. And even if the recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe. Even in the best-case scenario, temperatures will rise well above 2 degrees. So, as we open this much-anticipated climate conference, we are still heading for climate disaster. Young people know it. Every country sees it. Small island developing states and other vulnerable ones live it. And for them, failure is not an option. Failure is a death sentence. Excellencies, we face a moment of truth. We are fast approaching tipping points that will trigger escalating feedback loops of global heating. But investing in the net zero climate resilient economy will create feedback loops of its own, virtuous circles of sustainable growth, jobs and opportunity. We have progress to build upon. A number of countries have made credible commitments to net zero emissions by mid-century. Many have pulled the plug on international financing of coal. Over 700 cities are leading the way to carbon neutrality, and the private sector is waking up. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, the gold standard for credible commitments and transparent targets, is managing $10 trillion in assets and catalyzing change across industries. The Climate Action Army, led by young people, is unstoppable. They are larger, they are louder, and I assure you they are not going away, and I stand with them. Excellencies, the science is clear. We know what to do. First, we must keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. This requires greater ambition on mitigation and the immediate concrete action to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030. G20 countries have a particular responsibility as they represent around 80% of emissions. According to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, in light of national circumstances, developed countries must lead the effort. But emerging economies too must go the extra mile, as their contribution is essential for the effective reduction of emissions. We need maximum ambition from all countries on all fronts to make Glasgow a success. I urge developed countries and the emerging economies to build coalitions to create the financial and technological conditions to accelerate the decarbonization of the economy as well as the phase-out of coal. These coalitions are meant to support the large emitters that face more difficulties in the transition from grey to green, for them to be able to do it. Let's have no illusions. If commitments fall short by the end of this COP, countries must revisit their national climate plans and policies, not every 5 years, every year, every moment, until keeping to 1.5 degrees is assured, until subsidies to fossil fuels end, until there is a price on carbon, until coal is phased out. But we also need greater clarity. There is a deficit of credibility and a surplus of confusion over emissions reductions and net zero targets with different meanings and different metrics. That is why, beyond the mechanisms already established in the Paris Agreement, I'm announcing today that we'll establish a group of experts to propose clear standards to measure and analyze net zero commitments from non-state actors. Second, we must do more to protect vulnerable communities from the clear and present dangers of climate change. Over the last decade, nearly 4 billion people suffered climate-related disasters. That devastation will only grow. But adaptation works. Early warning systems save lives. Climate-smart agriculture and infrastructure save jobs. And all donors must allocate half their climate finance to adaptation. And public and multilateral development banks should start as soon as possible. Third, this COP must be a moment of solidarity. The $100 billion a year climate finance commitment in support of developing countries must become a 100 billion climate finance reality. And this is critical to restoring trust and credibility. I welcome the efforts led by Canada and Germany to help us get there. It is an important first step, but it delays the largest support for years, and it doesn't give clear guarantees. And beyond 100 billion, developing countries need far greater resources to fight COVID-19, to build resilience and pursue sustainable development. Those suffering the most, namely least developed countries and small island developing states, need urgent funding, more public climate finance, more overseas development aid, more grants, easier access to funding. And multilateral development banks must work much more seriously at mobilizing greater investment through blended and private finance. Excellencies, the sirens are sounding. Our planet is talking to us and telling us something. And so are people everywhere. Climate action tops the list of people's concerns across countries, age, and gender. We must listen, and we must act, and we must choose wisely. On behalf of these and future generations, I urge you, choose ambition, choose solidarity, choose to safeguard our future and save humanity, and I thank you.
There will now be a short film, a message from our planet to all of us, Earth to COP.
Commuter chaos this morning and delays for the day as high levels of water brought services to a standstill. The Met Office says we should be braced for more of this. Forget summer, they say. It's going to...
In the record now is becoming clearer and clearer that longer assume the temperature of the world. Прошло более 70 лет, но все еще загрязненность воздуха остается основной.
For the average American, that carbon footprint is about 16 tons of carbon emissions. What about COP26? We can see the ocean becoming worse.
The frequency of hurricanes. Scientists are correct in there. The sure sign of climate change.
No, don't be sorry.
Lo que es fundamental es que no lo normalicemos. No es una situación.
To have the courage to try.
A lot more jobs created in the green economy.
It's not a problem. Climate change is the expression.
The renewable energy technologies to fundamentally transform the energy system are at our disposal.
How do we begin the process of reversing global warming?
innovation, and this kind of innovation
launched the largest tree plantation campaign.
To develop a climate-altering
by continually reinvesting in our grasslands, we are looking down
a critical moment that we cannot not be part of.
COP26 is one of the most important diplomatic gatherings in history.
Humanity already knows what to do.
We've got a long way to go,
but there is momentum.
Roll up your sleeves and do it.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen, please welcome His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how devastating a global cross-border threat can be. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat, to the extent that we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing. Having myself had the opportunity of consulting many of you over these past 18 months, I know you all carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, and you do not need me to tell you that the eyes and hopes of the world are upon you, to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out. The recent IPCC report gave us a clear diagnosis of the scale of the problem. We know what we must do. With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources, we have to reduce emissions urgently and take action to tackle the carbon already in the atmosphere, including from coal-fired power stations. Putting a value on carbon, thus making carbon capture solutions more economical, is therefore absolutely critical. Similarly, after billions of years of evolution, nature is our best teacher. In this regard, restoring natural capital, accelerating nature-based solutions, and leveraging the circular bioeconomy will be vital to our efforts. As we tackle this crisis, our efforts cannot be a series of independent initiatives running in parallel. The scale and scope of the threat we face call for a global systems-level solution based on radically transforming our current fossil fuel-based economy to one that is genuinely renewable and sustainable. So, ladies and gentlemen, my plea today is for countries to come together to create the environment that enables every sector of industry to take the action required. We know this will take trillions, not billions of dollars. We also know that countries, many of whom are burdened by growing levels of debt, simply cannot afford to go green. Here we need a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector. With trillions at its disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders, it offers the only real prospect of achieving fundamental economic transition. So, how do we do it? First, how do we get the private sector all pulling in the same direction? After nearly 2 years now of consultation, CEOs have told me that we need to bring together global industries to map out, in very practical terms, what it will take to make the transition. We know from the pandemic that the private sector can speed up timelines dramatically when everyone agrees on the urgency and the direction. So each sector needs a clear strategy to speed up the process of getting innovations to market. Second, who pays and how? We need to align private investment behind these industry strategies to help finance the transition efforts, which means building the confidence of investors so that the financial risk is reduced. Crucially, investment is needed to help transition from coal to clean energy. If we can develop a pipeline of many more sustainable and bankable projects at a sufficient scale, it will attract greater investment. Third, which switches do we flick to enable these objectives? More than 300 of the world's leading CEOs and institutional investors have told me that alongside the promises countries have made, their nationally determined contributions, they need clear market signals, agreed globally, so that they have the confidence to invest without the goalposts suddenly moving. This is the framework I've offered in the Terracotta Roadmap, created by my Sustainable Markets Initiative, with nearly 100 specific actions for acceleration. Together, we are working to drive trillions of dollars in support of transition across 10 of the most emitting and polluting industries. They include energy, agriculture, transportation, health systems, and fashion. The reality of today's global supply chains means that industry transition will affect every country and every producer in the world. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the private sector is ready to play its part and to work with governments to find a way forward. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, many of your countries I know are already feeling the devastating impact of climate change through ever-increasing droughts, mudslides, floods, hurricanes, cyclones and wildfires, as we've just seen on that terrifying film. Any leader who has had to confront such life-threatening challenges knows that the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of prevention. So I can only urge you, as the world's decision makers, to find practical ways of overcoming differences so we can all get down to work together to rescue this precious planet and save the threatened future of our young people. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Please welcome the COP26 People's Advocate, who has dedicated his lifetime to highlighting the beauty of the natural world, Sir David Attenborough.
Your Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as you spend the next 2 weeks debating, negotiating, persuading and compromising, as you surely must, it's easy to forget that ultimately the emergency climate comes down to a single number: the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. The measure that greatly determines global temperature. And the changes in that one number is the clearest way to chart our own story, for it defines our relationship with our world. For much of humanity's ancient history, that number bounced wildly between 180 and 300. And so too did global temperatures. It was a brutal and unpredictable world. At times, our ancestors existed only in tiny numbers. But just over 10,000 years ago, that number suddenly stabilized, and with it, Earth's climate. We found ourselves in an unusually benign period, with predictable seasons and reliable weather. For the first time, civilization was possible, and we wasted no time in taking advantage of that. Everything we've achieved in the last 10,000 years was enabled by the stability during this time. The global temperature has not wavered over this period by more than plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. Until now. Our burning of fossil fuels, our destruction of nature, our approach to industry, construction and learning are releasing carbon into the atmosphere at an unprecedented pace and scale. We are already in trouble. The stability we all depend on is breaking. This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who've done the least to cause this problem are being the hardest hit. Ultimately, all of us will feel the impact, some of which are now unavoidable.
My world is melting.
You think you have control, we actually have no control.
I'm absolutely terrified to bring a child to this world.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all-too-human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today. Perhaps that will give us the impetus we need to rewrite our story, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must have carbon emissions, halt them this decade. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. A new industrial revolution, powered by millions of sustainable innovations, is essential and is indeed already beginning. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet. And as we work to build a better world, we must acknowledge no nation has completed its development, because no advanced nation is yet sustainable. All have a journey still to complete, so that all nations have a good standard of living and a modest footprint. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world, and our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
Can we fix climate problem in one generation? My answer would be yes. We have to.
We need to not just to talk about what we can do, but to do what we can.
This is a challenge that we should try to solve in a quick way with a long-term vision.
It comes down to this. The people alive now are the generation to come will look at this conference and consider one thing. Did that number stop rising and start to drop as a result of commitments made here? There's every reason to believe that the answer can be yes. If working apart, we are force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellencies, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley.
Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic has taught us that national solutions to global problems do not work. We come to Glasgow with global ambition to save our people and to save our planet, but we now find three gaps. On mitigation, climate pledges or NDCs. Without more, we will leave the world on a pathway to 2.7 degrees, and with more, we are still likely to get to 2 degrees. These commitments made by some are based on technologies yet to be developed, and this is at best reckless and at worst dangerous. On finance, we are $20 billion short of the $100 billion, and this commitment, even then, might only be met in 2023. On adaptation finance remains only at 25%, not the 50-50 split that was promised nor needed given the warming that is already taking place on this earth. Climate finance to frontline small island developing states declined by 25% in 2019. Failure to provide the critical finance and that of loss and damage is measured, my friends, in lives and livelihoods in our communities. This is immoral and it is unjust. If Glasgow is to deliver on the promises of Paris, it must close these three gaps. So I ask to you, what must we say to our people living on the front line in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Pacific, when both ambition and regrettably some of the needed faces at Glasgow are not present? What excuse should we give for the failure? In the words of that Caribbean icon Eddie Grant, will they mourn us on the front line? When will we, as world leaders across the world, address the pressing issues that are truly causing our people angst and worry, whether it is climate or whether it is vaccines? Simply put, when will leaders lead? Our people are watching, and our people are taking note. And are we really going to leave Scotland without the resolve and the ambition that is sorely needed to save lives and to save our planet? How many more voices and how many more pictures of people must we see on these screens without being able to move? Or are we so blinded and hardened that we can no longer appreciate the cries of humanity. I have been saying to Barbadians for many years that many hands make light work. Today, we need the correct mix of voices, ambition, and action. Do some leaders in this world believe that they can survive and thrive on their own? Have they not learned from the pandemic? Can there be peace and prosperity if 1/3 of the world literally prospers and the other 2/3 of the world live under siege and face calamitous threats to our well-being? What the world needs now, my friends, is that which is within the ambit of less than 200 persons who are willing and prepared to lead. Leaders must not fail those who elect them to lead. And I say to you, there is a sword that can cut down this Gordian knot, and it has been wielded before. The central banks of the wealthiest countries engaged in $25 trillion of quantitative easing in the last 13 years. 25 trillion. Of that, 9 trillion was in the last 18 months to fight the pandemic. Had we used that 25 trillion to purchase bonds, to finance the energy transition, or the transition of how we eat, or how we move ourselves in transport, we would now today be reaching that 1.5 degrees limit that is so vital to us. I say to you today in Glasgow that an annual increase in the SDRs of $500 billion a year for 20 years, put in a trust to finance the transition, is the real gap, Secretary General, that we need to close, not the 50 billion being proposed for adaptation. And if 500 billion sounds big to you, guess what? It is just 2% of the 25 trillion. This is the sword we need to wield. Our excitement 1 hour into this event is far less than it was 6 months ago leading up to this event. Can we, with those voices and these speeches from Sir David and others, find it within ourselves to get the resolve to bring Glasgow back on track? Or do we leave today believing that it was a failure before it starts? Our world, my friends, stands at a fork in the road. One no less significant than when the United Nations was formed in 1945. But then, the majority of our countries here did not exist. We exist now. The difference is we want to exist 100 years from now. And if our existence is to mean anything, then we must act in the interests of all of our people who are dependent on us. And if we don't, we will allow the path of greed and selfishness to sow the seeds of our common destruction. The leaders of today, not 2030, not 2050, must make this choice. It is in our hands. And our people and our planet need it more than ever. We can work with who is ready to go, because the train is ready to leave. And those who are not yet ready, we need to continue to ring circle and to remind them that their people, not our people, but their citizens, need them to get on board as soon as possible. Code red to the G7 countries. Code red to the G20. Earth to COP. That's what it said. Earth to COP. For those who have eyes to see, for those who have ears to listen, and for those who have a heart to feel, 1.5 is what we need to survive. 2 degrees, yes, SG, is a death sentence for the people of Antigua and Barbuda, for the people of the Maldives, for the people of Dominica and Fiji, for the people of Kenya and Mozambique, and yes, for the people of Samoa and Barbados. We do not want that dreaded death sentence. And we've come here today to say, try harder, because our people The climate army, the world, the planet, needs our actions now, not next year, not in the next decade. Thank you.
Bringing their message from their countries to COP, we will now hear from climate campaigners in Chile and Egypt.
Mi nombre es Isis Riquelme, activista climática, ecofeminista y estudiante de Geografía de Chile, y hoy les hablo para que se escuche la voz de la juventud de Latinoamérica. Debemos escuchar el mensaje que nuestro planeta nos envía. El mundo no está mal porque hay una pandemia, hay pandemias porque el mundo está mal. Hago un llamado a los líderes del mundo a que comprometan acciones concretas para detener la extinción de nuestras especies y de la humanidad. Hoy, los jóvenes alrededor del mundo hemos demostrado ser el presente a través de proyectos e ideas que aportan a mitigar y o adaptarse a la crisis climática. Es deber de todos los gobiernos escucharnos, es nuestro futuro el que está en juego. Las niñas y jóvenes mujeres latinoamericanas albergan sueños e ideas del mañana. Nos hemos empoderado de nuestras capacidades y hemos avanzado en materia de educación socioambiental para enfrentar esta crisis. Los proyectos que los jóvenes impulsamos para abordar el cambio son un claro ejemplo de soluciones viables y concretas para entregar las herramientas necesarias para la adaptación y empoderar a nuestras comunidades a ser agentes de cambio a lo largo de los territorios. Hemos organizado los continentes para proteger nuestros océanos por la biodiversidad invaluable que albergan. Hemos instado a la sociedad civil de 80 países a realizar acciones concretas para mitigar la crisis climática y levantar exigencias y propuestas que ustedes puedan ejecutar en sus países. Nosotros, sus niños, sus hijos, hemos decidido colaborar globalmente para cuidar nuestro hogar. Pero son ustedes quienes deciden cómo reedificarlo. Les insto a que escuchen y actúen. Debemos seguir construyendo sobre la ambición climática de la presidencia chilena en la COP26, trabajar localmente para impactar globalmente y tomar en cuenta el conocimiento de la sociedad civil. Este es mi mensaje desde el planeta a la COP. Ayúdennos por favor a garantizar un futuro mejor. En sus manos están nuestras vidas y las de los que vienen. Lo que decidan en esta conferencia cambiará el rumbo de la humanidad. Es tiempo de actuar.
تحياتي. أنا عبد الفتاح ندى، ناشط في قضية التغير المناخي ورائد أعمال اجتماعي في مجال التمكين الاقتصادي. أحدثكم من مصر لأنقل لكم رسالة باسم شباب الأرض التي باتت مهددة بخطر التغير المناخي يوما بعد يوم، بل دقيقة تلو الأخرى. النشطاء الشباب من كل أنحاء العالم يتكاتفون سويا من أجل رفع الوعي العالمي تجاه مشكلات التغير المناخي. فلابد أن يدرك الجميع أن تلك المشكلات ليست رفاهية، إنما تشكل مصيرنا الذي يتحدد من خلال كل قرار فردي نقوم به يوميا، سواء يضر بهذه البيئة أو يساهم في منحها فرصة أخرى في البقاء. حان الوقت الآن أن يبني قادة العالم أجمع على جهودنا كنشطاء، وأن يضعوا السياسات العامة التي تتصدى لأزمة المناخ في مقدمة أولوياتهم. لقد قضيت ال6 سنوات الماضية في العمل مع المجتمعات المحلية الأقل حظا في التنمية داخل مصر، من خلال تدريب الشباب والقادة المجتمعيين على ريادة الأعمال الاجتماعية والتمكين الاقتصادي باستخدام نماذج المشاريع الصديقة للبيئة. وقد وجدت أن هناك الكثير من الفرص لتحقيق التمكين الاقتصادي في تلك المناطق من خلال تلك المشاريع الخضراء. فعلى الرغم من النظرة إلى هذه المناطق أنها لا تعتبر مشكلات المناخ من ضمن أولوياتها، إلا أن الشباب هناك لديهم الكثير من الحلول المبتكرة لبدء مشاريعهم الاجتماعية الصديقة للبيئة، والتي تمكنهم من تحقيق دخل مادي بالإضافة للتصدي لأزمة التغير المناخي. هذه رسالتي من كوكب الأرض لقمة المناخ. أدعو قادة العالم لوضع مفاهيم الاقتصاد الأخضر والاقتصاد الدوار على رأس قائمة السياسات الاقتصادية العالمية في السنوات المقبلة. أؤمن بأن ذلك قد يساهم في تحويل تلك المحنة لمنحة حقيقية. أخيرا، يأمل شباب مصر في ضيافة قمة المناخ التالية، ونرحب بكم في العام القادم لرؤية نموذج مشرف من جهود شباب مصر لحماية كوكبنا وضمان مستقبل أفضل لكل من يعيش عليه. فقط تخيلوا ما يمكننا تحقيقه معا إذا وضعنا هذا الهدف كمهمتنا الجماعية. شكرا جزيلا.
15% of the world's population have a disability. Here is a message on their behalf.
My name is Eddie Ndoku.
Today, I'm speaking to you on behalf of the world's largest minority, the 15% of people in the world who have a disability. But make no mistake, there is nothing minor about who we are. We are larger than life, but because of systemic exclusion and inequality, our power and brilliance is often ignored or diminished. As an ambassador for the We the 15 campaign, I am here to tell you that we refuse to be rendered invisible in the climate action conversation. The impact of climate change is disproportionate for disabled people around the world. The change that climate change is creating is no longer a debate about the future or what might happen, because it is happening. We are some of the planet's most vulnerable citizens and some of the most resilient. But Earth is equally vulnerable, and its resilience is not without limits. We are dangerously close to reaching those limits. In my home in South Africa, I see the impact of climate change on our communities, on our economy, on our ability to grow food, and even to survive. I see a generation growing up with fear in their hearts at what the future holds. On behalf of everyone, disabled and non-disabled all around the world, I call on you to commit to concrete actions to stop the destruction of this magnificent planet. This conference is one of the most important meetings in history. You have the chance to make decisions and reach agreements which will affect the lives of generations to come. You are in a position of extraordinary power. You can change forever the trajectory we are on. You can make a world that is once again full of hope, not fear. This is my message from Earth to COP. On behalf of We the 15, I ask you, please help us to guarantee a safer future for every life, regardless of their ability.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi.
Prime Minister Johnson, Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the speeches we've just heard resonate deeply with me. Over the last few years, young people have done us a service by bringing the climate agenda on the front of our political debate. Young people were the center of the pre-COP summit in Milan. In Glasgow, here, we need to make them proud. The projected rise in global temperatures is set to affect dramatically life on our planet. From catastrophic fires and floods we've seen now, to the bleaching of coral reefs, to the loss of biodiversity, the impact of climate change is already all too evident. Its price also rising fast, especially for the poorer nations. The cost of disruptions for households and companies in low and middle-income countries amounts to a staggering $390 billion a year. Climate change also has serious repercussions on global peace and security. It can deplete natural resources and worsen social tensions, lead to new migration flows, and contribute to terrorism and organized crime. Climate change can tear us apart. Thanks to the constant dialogue and cooperation, we made good progress on addressing climate change. The G20 accounts for around 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions and around 80% of global GDP. At last weekend summit in Rome, its member states agreed that we must limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees. It was the first time. And committed to achieve net zero emissions by or around mid-century. We decided to step up our actions starting from this decade, enhance our nationally determined contributions, and stop the international public funding of unabated new coal by the end of this year. Here, at the COP26, we must now go further than we did at G20. We need to speed up our commitment to keep the rise in temperatures below 1.5 degrees. We need to build on the G20 agreement and act faster and more decisively. We must strengthen our efforts in the realm of climate finance. We must bring together the public and the private sector in new ways. We had a roadmap just made by Prince Charles. Prime Minister Johnson highlighted the amount of private money available. It's tens of trillions. But now we've got to use them. Now we have to find an intelligent way to spend them and spend them quickly. We need, first and foremost, that all multilateral development banks, and especially the World Bank, co-share with the private sector risks that the private sector alone cannot bear. We need country-based platforms where the World Bank and other banks, multilateral development banks, can actually co-share and make all this money usable to a good effort. This is the first, in a sense, great news that Prime Minister Johnson gave us today. That money is not a concern if we want to use it well. This COP26 must be the start of a new momentum, a quantum leap in our fight against climate change. And our youth must be at the center of this process. We intend to turn the Youth for Climate event we held in Milan into a regular feature of all COPs. Future generations will judge us for what we achieve or fail to achieve. We must involve them, listen to them, and above all, learn from them. Thank you.
Please welcome back Yersa Daly-Ward.
On Earth Day 2021, a competition was launched to give young people across the UK the opportunity to bring their voice to COP26. Together with Blue Peter, the longest-running children's programme in the world, COP26 asked them to use their creativity to send a message to you, the decision-makers of our planet. Thousands of children took part, and the film you're about to see brings to life the winning story written by Delphine, who has joined us here at the ceremony today. Delphine's story reminds us of what is so special about our world and why we should do everything in our power to protect our planet.
Delphine was a girl born in 2099. One day, her gran gave her a book, heavy with a spine. There were photographs of creatures she'd never ever seen. What are they, Gran, these animals? What does this all mean? Gran sighed. Many years ago, they roamed the earth and seas. But we bulldozed their homes and burnt down their trees. We put plastic in their oceans and greenhouse gases in the sky. But why did you let them, Gran? Why? Oh, why? Oh, why? I was just a child, she said. I shouted, no one took heed. Businessmen wanted money. It was nothing more than greed. That night, Delphine read on, and her eyes grew bigger and wider. And when she fell asleep, the creatures came to life inside her. A giant cat with golden stripes and glowing orange eyes. A candy floss pink bird taking off across the skies. A funny little lizard with colour-changing skin. Some speedy silver fish with spikes upon their fins. When the sun came up, the menagerie faded away, and Delphine's heart felt heavy in the cold grey light of day. Do you recognise them, dear readers of this tale?
In 2021, they're not figments for girls' imagination. We must protect them where we can for future generations.
To close the ceremony, please welcome climate and environmental activist Elizabeth Watuti.
My name is Elizabeth Watuti. I am a youth climate activist from Kenya. I have done a lot of soul-searching about what to say here today. I have asked myself over and over what words might move you. And then I realized that making my 4 minutes count does not rest solely on me. My truth will only land if you have the grace to fully listen. My story will only move you if you can open up your heart. I can urge you to act at the pace and scale necessary, but in the end, your will to act must come from deep within. I need to tell you what is happening in my home country. Right now, as we sit comfortably here in this conference center in Glasgow, over 2 million of my fellow Kenyans are facing climate-related starvation. In this past year, both of our rainy seasons have failed, and scientists say that it may be another 12 months before the waters return again. Meanwhile, our rivers are running dry. Our harvests are failing. Our storehouses stand empty. Our animals and people are dying. I have seen with my own eyes 3 young children crying at the side of a dried-up river after walking 12 miles with their mother to find water. Please open your hearts. This is not only happening in Kenya. Over the past few months, there have been deadly heat waves and wildfires in Algeria and devastating floods in Uganda and Nigeria. And there is more still to come. By 2025, in just 4 years' time, half of the world's population will be facing water scarcity. And by the time I'm 50, the climate crisis will have displaced 86 million people in sub-Saharan Africa alone. I would like you to join me in holding a moment of compassionate silence for the billions of people who are not here with us today, whose stories are not being heard, and whose suffering is not being felt. Please open your hearts. If you allow yourself to feel it, The heartbreak and the injustice is hard to bear. Sub-Saharan Africans are responsible for just 0.5% of historical emissions. The children are responsible for none, but they are bearing the brunt. We are the adults on this earth right now, and it is our responsibility to ensure that the children have food and water. I have been doing what I can. Inspired by the great Professor Wangari Maathai, I founded the Green Generation Initiative, a tree-growing initiative that enhances food security for young Kenyans. So far, we have grown 30,000 fruit trees to maturity, providing desperately needed nutrition for thousands of children. Every day we see that when we look after the trees, they look after us. But these trees and the life-saving fruit they bear will not survive on a 2.7 degrees Celsius warmer planet. The decisions you make here will help determine whether the rains will return to our land. The decisions you make here will help determine whether the fruit trees we plant will live or perish. The decisions you make here will help determine whether children will have food and water. I believe in our human capacity to care deeply and to act collectively. I believe in our ability to do what is right if we let ourselves feel it in our hearts. So for these next 2 weeks, let us feel it in our hearts. The children cannot live on words and empty promises. They are waiting for you to act. Please open your hearts and then act. Thank you.
You have heard Earth's impassioned message to you all. Earth is calling for action this day. This has been Earth to COP.